Hello everyone, I'm Grandmaster Priyadharshan Kannappan and welcome to Gyaan channel, and here we are going to be talking about checkmates in the C1 square. So we've been discussing in the previous episodes how checkmates happen on the A1 square, B1 square, so we rightfully move on to the C1 square of the chessboard. So the example that we have on here on the board is like where it's black to play, and black has actually a lot of good options. Like black, if he wants, he can take this rook, because on a5 the rook looks like it's hanging for free. But if you do look a bit more careful, there's actually a checkmate on the board, and that is rook c1. Because after rook c1, this bishop on d2 is unable to capture the rook because there's a pin over here. Because if the bishop moves, the king would come under attack by the bishop on b4, right? So after rook c1 check, there is no escape for the king, because in case, let's say, can I go king f2? But no, I can't, because there's a knight sitting on e4 protecting the f2 square. So basically this is check on c1. It's not just a check, but it's actually a checkmate as the king is trapped. So this is the first example. Let's move on to the next example that we have. So here the position that we have, it's white to play, and black's king looks really funny on a4. Like, how did the king land up on a4? Like, we have to see the full game to figure that out. But it's very clear that the king is very misplaced, and if white makes the right moves, we can checkmate the black king. So if you look at it, one important thing that's going bad for the black king is that he can't really go to the b file and escape, because this rook on b7 is controlling some critical escape squares like b4 and b5. So white starts with a check. And before I kind of reveal the moves, if you haven't yet found the answer, I would suggest you to try to find the answer, and then, like, watch this video. So here in this position, white started with b3 check and king a3. So one important aspect of giving a checkmate is you need to give a check, right? Like, if it's a check, then it could be a check, or it could even be a checkmate. Another important aspect, if you want to deliver a checkmate, is that the opponent's king should not have exit squares. If you look at the current position, the black king does possibly have one square where it can run to in the future, which is king to a2. So what should we do as white? We should take away the a2 square. So that's what white does in this game, and that is king to b1. So now that the a2 square is also controlled, now if you look at the king on a3, the king cannot go to b4 because there's a rook on b7. King cannot go to a2 because there's a king on b1. That does mean if white can give a check the next move, and if these exit squares are still controlled, it's a checkmate. So black just makes a random move, because black doesn't have any good moves to suggest here. Plays a5, and I'm pretty sure you all would have guessed what's the move for white, and that is bishop c1 with a checkmate. So let's move on to the next example that we have here. The position that we have on the board is black to play. And remember the two key points I mentioned in the previous example. One, if you want to give a checkmate, it has to be a check. Another is, ensure that there is no escape routes for the opponent's king. So in this position, if you do look, the king on c1 definitely looks very funny, and even the blacks, like rook a3, knight b4, bishop on e5, which I've highlighted in green, are in a very, very dominating position, kind of weaving a mating checkmate, a mating net, what we call. And if you look at the white pieces, the rook on h1, knight on e1, bishop on d1, all are kind of very undeveloped. They are on the first rank. So black importantly makes a move here which takes away a critical escape square for the white king. So I would suggest you to find a series of moves and then, watch the video. So pause the video if you're still trying to find the move that black could have played here, and let's go on and now see what move black played in this position, and that is bishop c3. So the whole point of this move is that this d2 square, which was an escape square for the white king on c1, is now taken away. So white goes knight c2. I think it's a very fair move by white, because white says that you cannot give me a check anymore on rook a1, because if you do, I'm just going to capture the rook. And also the point to note is that now the rook is being attacked by the knight on c2. So now black comes up with a forced checkmate in 3. So try to guess the moves here. If you did find knight d3, brilliant job by you, because knight d3 is the move, right move here. After king b1, rook b3 check, king a2, and here we deliver the checkmate with knight c1, and the king cannot go to any of these squares because the rook is controlling a3, a1 is controlled by the bishop, and the king is under attack by the knight. So it's a checkmate. So let's move on to the next example. So this is the last example of this topic that I had, and it's like, I think, slightly tough than the previous three examples that we saw. So here is the position, and let me first flip the board to look from white's perspective, because it's actually white to move, and white made a terrible move which allowed a black, kind of an easy checkmate. But imagine if you are playing white in this position and you are really, really want to save this game, make a draw or try to, evade checkmate for few more moves. What would be the variations that you would calculate? Because there's only one kind of saving line for white, and white did not find that in this game. So, wear your thinking hat and try to find that move before watching this video further. So here in this position, that only drawing line starts with queen h8 check over here, and after queen h8 check, the king has to move to g4, and then you come queen a1. This is the key move, because now we have taken away the control of the c1 square, because black was hoping to give rook c1 check, but now rook c1 check is not a possibility, and black is like, okay, if I cannot give a check on c1, how about I go rook h2? I try to give a checkmate via h1, but here comes the next check by white, which is queen g7, and now the king has to go to either f3 or f4 or h4 or h3 or h5. But it makes a lot of sense to not to go into the h file, because then the queen would just check on the h file and move the king back into the g file. So king f3 looks like something interesting, right? But here white has queen c3 check again, and basically this king on f3 cannot escape the checks, because if you do go something like king f4, there is queen c1 check. So there's always some check or another, and it leads to a draw. In the game though, white failed to find queen h8, and instead white played c7, which is just a terrible, terrible move. And I'm sure you would have guessed what black would play here, and that is rook c1. And what is rook c1? It is a check. And where does the king on g1 get to move? No squares, because f2 is controlled by the g3 pawn, and g2 is controlled by the bishop, and the king, and h2 is controlled by the pawn and the king, and the rook is giving a check on the king. So basically it's a checkmate. So that's all the examples that I wanted to show on the c1 square checkmates. I hope you are enjoying the series of episodes. Please do like the video, subscribe to the channel, and like, comment and share it with your friends if you do like the content interesting. So I'll see you all in a different video very soon. Signing off, Grandmaster Priyadarshan. Bye bye everyone.